Dumelang Sanbonani, good day. Gone are the days where women used to be around the house, cleaning, washing dishes, or just raising children. Today, they are in leadership positions. Today, they are taking the space, being heard, and being part of the solution for South Africa. In studio, I have a woman who needs no introduction. Her name is Gugu Ndima. She's currently the national spokesperson of RISE Mzansi. She served in the ANC Youth League and in her early politics life, also the Young Communist League. She's been a very strong voice, and also she's an author, a woman of many talents. Gugu Ndima, how are you?
Hi, Modise. How's it?
I'm good. I'm looking at your bio. I'm like, hey, comrade.
Oh, Ndima.
Comrade is rising. You are rising. Oh man, tell me more about it. Gugu Ndima, who is she? Upuma Puyapi.
Gooks, I always say she's Icheru from Ekatlehong. You know, she's a township girl who grew up there. And politics made her. She didn't think she'd have in politics. I always say no one chooses politics. Politics chooses you.
Yes.
And in essence, I've never had a configured plan. You know, that I would be in politics, I'd be an activist, but I suppose what you believe in, what you're passionate about will always redirect you to places where you need to be. So, yeah, it's been quite a journey, as you've said, from the ANC Youth League. So I'm from Eguruleni. As I've said, I grew up in Katlehong, but it started way back than that. And I eventually found myself in the ANC Youth League, so from school, people that I grew up with. And subsequent to that, I was in branches. I was in a zone, a Polsitlu zone in Katlehong. And then I became an RSC member of the ANC Youth League. And then in no time, I was a national spokesperson of the Young Communist League. Hey. We had an early conversation about that. I was introduced to left politics. And interestingly, I've always said the ANC was my home, but the SACP and the YCL became my university because that's how I got to understand what ideological politics are. I got a different perspective of what society is, you know. You know how everyone speaks about capitalism, but also just a sense of how you need to question the world. I always say if there's anything I would take from the General Secretary Blade Zimando, okay, I know he's a chairperson now, but I've always said he's the GS, is that you must question anything that happens in society. I have a very schizophrenic relationship with the state as well, thanks to the YCL and the SACP. So that became my ground in terms of understanding reality that, hey, media, by the way, is not just what you need to consume, but there's propaganda to it. That, you know, things such as poverty are orchestrated. It's not people, you're not born into it. The fact is you are born into a system that decides how class is configured, how society is configured, but also as a woman, that you're a black woman, you belong to a certain class, there are certain challenges, and they become a back foot for you, and not out of your doing, not out of your choice. You know how everyone says, live within your means, you should be, you know, and that's why I have such a bad relationship with self-help books, because they don't say you are within a system, it dictates. So if you were born in a shack, you know, there are certain things that are back-footing. If you're born from a single parent, there are certain things you're back-footing. And those are realities that, unfortunately, you don't get people who speak about even within your education system, who tell you about as you grow. And I'm eternally appreciative for politics of the Young Communist League and the SACP and the ANC to a certain extent.
But then the question would be, Gugu, to say, the transition alone, right? Some of us, I think all of us, we come from the ANC at some point to political journey starting. But the transition from a more of a leftist party, liberation type of politics, moving to RISE Mzansi, which is more of a social democrat, leaning towards center, I don't know.
Center-left.
Center-left, if that's the word to use. Lately, these political terms. But then the transition itself, what would you say has been the greatest, or what was the moment of epiphany where you had a certain realization?
Look, for me, activism is not a liberation movement exclusive. And I think society, or the evolution of society, especially on the continent, has proven that. And unfortunately, even liberation movements go through their own transitions where, even in terms of character, you start questioning what exactly or where is it moving? We're speaking about the National Democratic Revolution. And look, as I've said, I'm eternally grateful for the experiences, everything that I've been exposed to. But at some point, I felt I no longer identify, with how the party was going. At some point in 2016, some comrades of the Youth League, I was there, we led Occupy Lutuli House, where we had said, the party's not going the way it should. I mean, even in terms of voters, if you look at just the patterns of voters, these are people who would have been trusted.
Yes.
And for the longest of time, you find that even the voters themselves would not vote for any other party, but they would simply stay away because they've always had this confidence and faith in this movement that has been very instrumental, and not just in terms of politics, but it's been a leader of society in many aspects, whether it's churches, whether it's in society, whether it's in communities, and it was strong and quite significant. I mean, even if you look at now with what has transpired, you see that there's also a sense of confidence in how they've led this GNU coalition politics and so forth. But we cannot run away from the fact that if you believe that a vehicle no longer serves the purpose, there's nothing wrong and there's no crime in saying, look, I still believe in what I believe in activism, as I've said. It's not a liberation movement exclusive, but let's move and try and find our spaces anywhere else. I mean, people I grew up with in the ANC Youth League, some went to the EFF initially. Certain people I grew up with went into different parties.
But wouldn't be a debate be that when you move from ANC to EFF, it's the same ideological position, right? Not really, but yeah. No. But then when you look at, I think maybe what you are saying is, as much as you believe in the ideals of the organization, it was the application and the character, or maybe the quality of leadership at the time, that you felt like it's good in paper, but it's very far from practice.
Look, perennially, when I've always said, liberation movements, you'd find that they know the diagnosis. They know exactly what the problem is. And this is encapsulated in organizational and political reports. But unfortunately, they end up gathering dust. So clearly, there is no political will in terms of transforming that. And remember, you don't entirely say you've abandoned what you believe in your cause. And it doesn't mean that you cannot influence in other spaces. At the end of the day, I say this is a generational mission. I think it's always been said about people that I grew up with in politics, is to say, let's move and advance. You never know, but at some point we will congregate in that regard. And the GNU has also proven that as well. Some of the most ideologically contradictory aspects, as you've said. But
I think that's the PAC there.
But and I think that's what we should all be able to appreciate, that we can all contribute in various spaces and be able to say we have one common objective. Everyone wants to see South Africa progress, irrespective of where you are. We know that we've got issues of porous borders. We know we've got issues of inequalities. But if someone sincerely believes that, look, I don't think I can find space in this area anymore, but I can still contribute. And that's why you've also got civil society. You've got church leaders that also believe that they can contribute. And that's what I like about this particular epoch of politics. You're getting a sense of even people who have never been in politics before coming through and saying, I want to make this contribution. And as I've said, it shouldn't be an exclusive of people who are experienced in politics, because look at what has happened. Also, the growing sense of entitlement and arrogance. I really was despondent about that, where you feel leaders believe by virtue of the fact that we belong to this party, therefore we're entitled to your votes, or by virtue of being black.
Or we're in exile.
Yes, we're in exile and so forth. By virtue of being black, therefore you're supposed to vote a certain way. And remember, even black people in a sense are not a homogeneous entity. Black women are not a homogeneous entity. So let's be able to appreciate the diversity that we all bring in whatever sectors, whatever class, and whatever race, and be able to to congregate around this mission of Project South Africa.
I'm going to come to this part, and I think as a woman who is in politics, who has served in different aspects, would you say South Africa, within the political space, we have literally championed that mission to have women being 50-50 women representation in leadership structures, even beyond political organizations, can be business. Do you think we have done well, or we still have a long way to go?
Very interesting question, and I think you cannot answer yes or no.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Look, we have legislative interventions that speak to meeting certain requirements and quotas. So you need X amount of women for you, for example, to get a tender. You need X amount of women to be represented in parliament and all of that.
Yes.
That's something else. I think my bone of contention, because you can have women in all echelons of power.
Sure.
The question becomes, how do you influence policy? How do you influence politics of that organization? How do you influence decisions? I mean, we speak about the ANC now, and this is the oldest liberation movement, but they have not had a secretary general or president that is female. You know,
Okay.
So there are ways in which we can make society look like it has adopted. It's good. Look, we cannot avoid. I mean, I'm a product myself that women have advanced.
Yes.
But to what extent, and who makes this predetermination of a ceiling? Who makes this predetermination of where a woman should, you know, what is the maximum? You know,
So you're saying they're just a mere formality?
there is to a certain degree compliance. Right? It is important. Legislation is an integral part. We have made progress and we cannot deny that. But is this the exception or the norm? You know, we sit here, we've just had Statistics South Africa, if I'm not mistaken, that has issued out stats about unemployment. Poverty, the face of unemployment is still the black woman. You know, we have a story of women who were shot as if they were nothings and their bodies fed to a farm. And the question is, had that story not made it to me, how many of these stories are being actually told or actually get to your public main discourse media? But also going back to areas of politics and also business, to what extent do women, shape direction of corporate South Africa, for example? To what extent do they shape policy direction? You know, I'll give you a very specific example because it affects black women. Look at a trolley when you go grocery shopping. Yes. Unilever still is the monopoly in your grocery, whether you like it or not. And I've said, you've got a department such as the Department of Trade and Industry. Why hasn't it called that 30 to 40% of ownership, you know, or the value chain should be black women? Because you find black women who are producing things, they're selling things on Instagram. You find black women who are pushing and advancing themselves, but who actually is able to influence that policy direction. So yes, there are women. We've seen women ministers, we've seen women wherever, but the question is, are we actually influencing policy, or are we in offices and saying, yes, this is how I want things to happen? And more importantly, you don't get antagonized for that. And you don't get reprimanded or isolated because you wanted to contest presidency. You know, not even the Youth League has had a female president.
Yeah.
You know, and this is supposed to be part of a progressive organization that has been there forever, that has championed.
But then those who have done it for some reason, do you think it was more in the spirit just of tokenism, or just having that woman, what do you call it, a trophy vibe, but not necessarily being at the forefront, actually making decisions? It's more like they're putting you there as a secretary, but there is some guy behind the scenes who's running you.
It would be disingenuous to simply say they're just all tokens. It's not fair. Women really have to fight. So even the ones who make it, society perceives it as if you've just achieved something beyond, and that's why I say it's systemic. So even the black woman who makes it as a CEO, she's isolated as a CEO. So even the black woman who makes it as a provincial secretary, she ends up being isolated as a provincial secretary. The woman who makes it in the higher echelons of power, she's there, but she knows that she gets isolated to a point that pulling other women becomes difficult. I mean, I've seen it in politics where for male comrades, it's easier. They have more proteges. They have more people who actually support them in their ambitions in politics, as opposed to a woman who actually shares the same thing. And you'd find that the woman experiences even some of this backlash from other females. And I've always said it's not necessarily a hate thing, but it's the system that says the moment you get in, others don't. You end up excluding others. And also from a patronage perspective. So, money-wise, or let's say in terms of resources, they still largely allocated to males. So whether in politics or business, men still own the bulk of wealth. So even if you were to be a woman and say, look, I want to contest presidency, you need a whole lot of money to do that. So the question becomes, who funds you? And largely you need to go speak to the males. And the males would want to determine, okay, if that is the case, this is how we want this trajectory to go. So it's not a matter of that you don't have fierce, strong women out there who would want to advance certain things. But the question is, from a resource perspective, from a support perspective, they don't have as much as their male counterparts, being it in business or politics.
But then one would say, before 1994, there was only 2.7% of women representation in parliament. Today we are on 42%. Isn't this a success story, maybe compared to it's only been 30 years?
Hence, I've said it. I've said you can't underestimate the efforts or the advancement that has been made. And my question maintains that, to what extent does that, allow women to advocate or advance their own agenda? So it is important. And I say legislation has played an integral role, or a very imperative role in terms of changing the face of politics and government. It's very important.
True.
But I feel that there's still a ceiling. There's still a predeterminative to say, yes, you can get this far. Yes, you can be part of this. Yes, you can be a chairperson of this portfolio committee. But strategic decisions, people who still make the decisions, whether in organizations or in these caucus rooms that you don't know about, do you really find those women there? So yes, we can. I mean, you could have a whole nation of women and still men would lead. The majority of voters, the majority of people in South Africa are women.
Yes.
But we still have not had a female president. So it's not just a gender issue. I think, as I've said, it's a systemic issue. It's a resource issue. And it's also intentional. Because remember, some women are even scared of advancing these things. So patriarchy is not necessarily advanced by men only. There are women who find comfort in it. And you can't also chastise them for it. What is it that makes that comfortable? Why is it that even the Women's League, has said, listen, we want this candidate unapologetically, and we're going to push or advance them to become president of the ANC?
In 2015, you wrote an open letter to DJ's Boo, where you said they will never understand the man whose family tree is robbed of their birthright. I think you're speaking towards more family values here. And as a woman who's in leadership, and as you've seen, like slowly but surely, the family value of the nuclear family type of style, it's slowly declining in South Africa. You have a rise of baby mamas and baby daddies. Marriages are not lasting. What is your opinion on that?
The family nucleus, it's a very important thing. And I think, a whole lot of elements contribute to it. So the nucleus in itself, a mother, a father, children, these
Beautiful.
days it's being questioned if that is even the family nucleus. And I think, for us blacks, largely it's been more communal than it has been just mom, dad, and so forth. We've been raised in communities, which I think are also important, because you're also an individual who's part of a community, which has been destroyed by the demands of capitalism, unfortunately, at some point, where black males have had to be in mines, have to go out and work in other areas or provinces, those aspects. But also normalization of not being able to take responsibilities, the fact that the majority of people that are single parents are black women. And, I'm a single mom myself. We live in a society where that is supposedly okay, where it's the woman that's supposed to go to court and say, listen, you need to take care of yourself. But in terms of family institutions, look, you can have a mom and a dad and you find it's destructive. And you find that a child doesn't grow up happy child, whatever, the ideal. So the question becomes, what is it that we need to maybe unlearn or redo as a society. And we cannot run away from the fact that capitalism has eroded a lot of family values or what we should be contributing. People speak about mental health issues. We've prioritized making money. We've prioritized chasing the rand in this instance. And that has robbed a lot of children, a lot of parents of your dreams of what it is to be a member of community or a member of society. Because in majority, you spend the day out of your comforts.
Yes.
Better part of it you spend at work. You come back into a society. And that also has had ripple effects. So issues of crime, issues of destruction in society.
But the Gugu, somebody else would say, as of recent, back then we would blame poverty to say we are poor, we're working in the mines, and our parents this and that. But now we are in a space where we are graduates, you guys are empowered, you live in cities, but still we have not mastered the family component, or how do we keep our families intact? How do we raise responsible children? How do we have present fathers? So back then I could blame the grandfather who worked in the mines. I could blame whoever worked in whatever. But now you are literally next door to Thabo. But Thabo is not present. Or you say, I don't need a man because I'm doing very well with my life. Isn't that the attitude maybe of the recent culture whereby we don't value that as a key thing? We are starting to value, if women are independent, they don't need a man. If a man has money, feels like I'm trying to look for a better way to describe it. Yeah.
So what is the difference between Jabu then, who left and went to the mines, and Jabu who lives now and is renting in Midrand? I'm trying to understand, because you say things have progressed. To what extent? There are facades in society. I'll come back to what you're saying. There are facades of progression. There is progression.
Yes.
So you've got urban poverty, which is at its highest at this point, a high rate of unemployment and so forth.
Even the middle class is crying.
Yes, but now even the middle class in itself, when you say that now you are better placed to play an active role and so forth, how is it different how is society different from that time? Because ultimately everyone is pushed into saying you need to work, work towards something. And it's not everyone who has an opportunity to build a stable family, be able to choose the job that they want to be. How many graduates, for example, are working in environments that they would have want to work into? But be that as it may, it's not just about that. It's not about being part of a class. As I've said, it's about what we have learned. Do we come from homes where we're able to understand this nucleus? The majority of people being raised by grandmothers, single mothers, and so forth. And how is it that we assume money just makes everything okay? It's institutional. It's a value system. It's us being able to understand what is it exactly does it mean in terms of identity? How have we grown up? So I beg to differ on the issue of saying, yes, by virtue of the fact that I've got this, then I can maintain. Because it's not just the money or the maintenance that makes a family, but the institution in itself. Do we even understand what the family institution is, what it needs to be doing? You've got the supposed middle class that is drowning in alcohol, frustrated by the realities of everyday life. Do we underestimate those things? And what is causing that? Yes, you've got independent black women, but probably some are rage, some are angry and frustrated. And maybe this whole independence facade doesn't even exist. I mean,
the Gugu. My question was, and thank you for touching on that independent woman thing, which has been quite a movement, and I've been liking it. The ladies in their I-10s, with their high heels. I'm self kikokomate. It's my money, my life, but then the question is, how does that affect them in terms of family values, in terms of being present at home, in terms of literally being mothers and being nurturers of their home, as usually men would expect. Men are providers. That's our role, regardless whether you are a millionaire, whether you are working at a whatever, but your role is to provide. And I think for women, they know it very well, whether you're a CEO or whatever, your role is to nurture, to protect, not to nurture and take care of the family. So how does this affect, as a person who is in leadership right now, who is in government, how does this affect your family when you go back home? Do your kids complain you're hardly home? Do your kids complain, Mom, you're always in meetings? Do you feel that you're not spending too much time with your family?
Look, as I've said, a lot of facades have been created about progression or that we've evolved as a society, but seemingly we're drowning in this very same supposed ideal of success because of what is portrayed to be successful, and the whole idea that, yes, she's an independent woman, as you said, and she seems to have gotten her whatever together.
She got her own, yeah.
To a certain extent, I think there's a distortion about it. I think everybody, as I've said, belongs to a community, belongs to a family nucleus. Some of the things, unfortunately, that divide that or maybe have broken into that, as I've said, is the rush towards success. There's a hype, there's a sense of redirection towards this. And I don't even think we know what this idea of success is, because you'd say, ask someone, if you were to be a multimillionaire, would that make you happy? If you get to the high echelons of power, does that make you happy? But at the end of the day, you find that people are just as frustrated in that regard. As I've said, we've got an increase in alcohol, substance abuse, and all of that. And yet you're claiming that people are progressing. Right. So maybe we also need to rethink and go back to what is this family institution? What are these communities that we're trying to build? And also for Gugu, for example, Gugu, are you okay or content with the fact that you're a single mom? Definitely not, know. And the reality is, what are the culminations of these things that have created that? But look, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that we are any different from those who had to slave. The difference is that it was apartheid, it was imposed. It was those corporations at that time, it was systemic. But we've not gotten out of it and said, what is it that ideally we would like to do? I mean, you hear women these days say, look, if I had my way, I would have just been a housewife and comfortable at home raising my children. And look at how many women who don't have the opportunity to go and raise their kids properly and have to take them to nursery, early childhood development centers at a very early age, because there are demands of this capitalism which feeds into this life that you speak of, that I have to drive around in a German car, I have to look a certain way, blah, 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 blah. But, and, we're all humans. Beyond career, you also need to feed yourself spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and all of those. So I think the whole narrative of what success is, I don't buy into it. I think people...
But Gugu, I think somebody else would say it's quite simple, right? You have a husband, you have a wife, you have children in a family. That's what the nuclear family looks like. And previously, that could not be achieved. Even though you say it's a facade now, that women now, they have more, they have access to money, power, and even positions of influence. But the question then becomes, since you said it's a facade, then what does true progress look like according to you?
Progress is just being able to balance aspects of yourself as a human being. So, as I've said, you could have that family nucleus, but you find that you're unhappy inside of it, right? But also the family also needs to exist within society. It also has to exist within communities. And who are you doing it for? When you speak of this success, who are you doing it for? There are, within our generation, a lot of people that are getting divorced,
True.
And you'd find it's as a result of the fact that someone had this idea that, I'll be married, I'll have these 3 kids, and I'll be okay, and I'll have a career. But you find that a person suddenly feels that I shouldn't be in this situation, or I don't believe in this narrative anymore. But look, it's a lot, because even this specific generation, I say it has to learn and unlearn a lot of things that they've had to go through, but there's no manual to it. So some have not been raised in these ideal family nucleuses. Some have had to unlearn some of the things their parents have been teaching them as well, to say, this is how you raise a child. And we are now dealing with a different kind of generation of children who are, speaking about their identity and non-binary and God knows what else. And these are things that we are confronted with. So there's a lot in terms of transition that we're going through. And unfortunately, I think members of our generation are also frustrated by it, to say, I've been told that I'm a man, I'm a son, I must provide this, that, and the third. And it becomes a burden. Some of these are things men don't talk about, right? Once upon a time, everybody used to go to church on a Sunday, and suddenly they're now Sunday chill sessions and so forth. But also outlets about the frustrations and the realities and these intersectional transitions that Black people are going through in particular, and the so-called Black middle class. So I cannot honestly say that we're okay, and I cannot say by virtue of the fact that we are resourced better than, yes, everything's fine. It's good, it's important. People are in careers, great stuff. But clearly, even within this transition, because some people feel that there's a misunderstanding of this new Black woman who's supposedly independent and so forth. But also this new Black woman also needs to learn and unlearn certain things as well. The Black man as well also needs to learn and unlearn certain things too. So those are the challenges of it. And I think we're just at this epoch, particularly those born in the 70s and 80s. I think they're really trying to find themselves moving forward, to say exactly in terms of identity, what is identity at this point? And also dealing with the children that you've got who have a different identity from what you were as well.
But I think someone would say, aren't we making an issue out of something that has always been ordinarily there, right? Every generation will have its own struggle, but then the culture, or rather, would you say, the foundation will always remain the same, right? I grew up maybe I was fortunate in that sense. I grew up with my mom and dad. I wouldn't say they were perfect, that I was not there in their bedroom when they were fighting, blah, blah, blah. But I tend to feel that now we tend to want to overanalyze every single bit of things, and we will always find something wrong if you overanalyze everything. Like even on the issue of marriage and family, it's just the way nature dictates that a child, if is to be born, must be born with between a nucleus family for him to have a better growth. And then if the standards of life at that time are different, right now you have TikToks, you have whatever, the parenting or even the community, as you said, the foundation must remain the same. And even as the struggles change, we have the same foundation. Wouldn't you agree that maybe it's because of this over-analyzing, trying to be deep with a lot of things that are just purely basic? Maybe that's what kind of draws us back. I mean, now you have women who wants to be deep on why marriage is important, why is it not important. But we all know that it's important. It's critical. It's just the way it is. Whether you are happy in it or not, it's marriage.
Oh, wow. Look, maybe you're right, but you cannot run away from an evolution of society. You speak about fundamentals being the same. If that was the case, a lot would have not changed.
Yeah.
Some people would have been content with other systems and institutions back
Sure.
then. And you cannot act as if factors are the same, as I've said. A lot has changed. Transitionally, society has changed. There's a way in which people thought at that time.
Sure.
There was also certain impositions. Let's say, for example, a woman would stay in marriage because sometimes you wouldn't even be able to accumulate assets, such as a house.
Sure.
And you would need the signature of her husband. So patriarchy, to a certain extent, assisted in a lot of marriages actually continuing. So it wasn't because abantu bebabegezela because they wanted to, but purely because there were a lot of things systemically. So you couldn't have a property and be on your own and things like that. Things have changed, and as a result of that, or evolution, or laws for that matter, people have access to certain things, or people look at the family nucleus differently and all of that. And all of a sudden, you're free to divorce. There are some religions and cultures where it was totally out of the question. In fact, it was considered taboo,
Forbids, yeah.
right? And that's why you'd even find marriages that are being dissolved where a person says, I've been with this person for 30 years, but I'm leaving. Purely because now they have an opportunity to leave. Some marriages are actually there because people married in community of property and they have joint assets, and the thought of someone taking their pension or 50% of their pension by the other spouse is unthinkable, you know. So, look, we can't have a right or wrong answer in this regard. And you can't run away from the fact that there are different variables that contribute towards why people are taking decisions they are. You might be right. I see things differently.
Yeah.
But, and equally, as you've said, there's maybe an over-analysis of certain things that actually had to be simple. But remember, what is considered simple by you might be considered very complicated by the other. Bearing in mind that Conan is Tembu, there are many ways in which people have built family institutions.
True.
So a lot of people use their own schools of thought to rationalize. So a Christian would look at it in a different way. A Muslim would look at it. Someone who was born as Tembin would look at it differently. But it's not simple. And bearing in mind that because you've got a constitutional democracy that allows and enables a lot of things versus via apartheid at that time,
Yes.
people want to be known. People want to say, look, I'm here and this is what I believe in. And that's the consequence of a democratic dispensation.
Don't you think that most of it is there is a gap between what we've been through as a nation or as a black race, the healing gap that we have not really grasped? Maybe there's a healing that needs to be done. And then what we have normalized as culture, which sometimes could be a dysfunction in a way, based on where we come from and how sometimes we tend to glamorize things like cheating. We glamorize things like living relationships, or glamorize the idea of being in a relationship because there's some money to it, or nine daughter must have this to be with me. I mean, now we have women who are glamorized, who think that being a woman is how they look and not the quality of their character. You have BBLs now in Dubai for some reason. So don't you think there is a part of healing that needs to take place as a nation, as a black race, to kind of really, as you said, unlearn certain things that we may have normalized, but are actually dysfunctions?
When we started, I said, let's not make a rebuttable presumption that we're a homogeneous entity, as a society. We come from different backgrounds. Healing, definitely. There was one presentation, I forgot his name, and he spoke about that to say, we transitioned 94, here we are, but no one actually spoke about the healing, particularly of the black majority. But also, we have a serious identity crisis generally, and it's not because there's one identity to identify who the black South African is. There's a number of ways that people are trying to find themselves. There are people that had learned Christianity for the longest of time. In fact, when you spoke about the family nucleus, everybody used to go to church, and some have defied that and said, listen, I want to go the ancestral path, or people have changed names. We used to have an English and an African name,
Margaret.
And also people, if you look at some of these shows that are thriving and some of this black pain on this channel, I will not mention, where you've got people going looking for their dads, those are actually serious chronic issues within society and families, where people would fight over a property that has been in the family for so many generations and things like that.
There were those who were fighting over a grave wheelbarrow, like our comrades on TV. But I think,
as I've said, the reality is that there's a serious identity crisis, and I think the whole idea of trying to legislate it through this Rainbow Nation, South Africa, I don't think blacks were afforded an opportunity to say, okay, this is how we feel and this is how
and how do we fit
move
into
forward
this?
And how, it wasn't imposition, everything was okay, there was reconciliation. In fact, they looked like, it felt like more of a PR exercise than it was about actually building fundamentally a nation. And I mean, you see these deep-seated realities and pain of a lot of black South Africans now, when people call out that, this Rainbow Nation is a facade, or issues of whether it's xenophobia, whether violence. We're a very violent society, by the way, as well, and just how, I think, exhausted, black South Africans are.
We are tired.
It's extremely, because you find that, let's just take an example. You think by the age of 40 or 30, you would have been somewhere, and suddenly you realize there are certain things you had to first deal with that are not even of your own making.
Yes.
that are generational, and you first have to go and fix your property ekaya. You have to deal
Raise
with
some
this.
people's-
There's unveiling of God knows who else. And it's a lot. And you find that you have to heal so many generational issues before you even get yourself and say, listen, now I want to get to a point where I start my life.
Yeah.
So healing, the issue of healing, it is very important. I don't think we took it seriously. Worse, look at even just the COVID period and now. As a nation, I think we went through a lot. People lost economically. People had to rethink.
But there is an age or time where things shifted. I'm not sure what it was 2010 or 2011, where we started hearing a different narrative from women who were angry, women who were bitter, women who were saying men are dogs. Hey, you don't need a man in your life. I can do it all by myself. And they came up with a movement called feminism, right? Even though I think our understanding of feminism is different. Yeah, I understand. But no, I understand what is feminism very well. But I think the way the movement started running, and now slowly but surely is breeding the generation of slay queens, a generation of all of this, women who feel that love is a weakness, to be in love and to be with a man. Look, you must always be 10 steps ahead of them. They're so insecure and paranoid that they could get hurt. So they say it's better to do it for money. It's better just to date a guy who can give me something than to fall in love with a guy who's gonna leave me later on in life. Isn't that the perception? Maybe I'm wrong.
No, don't distort
Okay.
the conception of feminism.
No, I'm not distorting. I'm saying feminism understand what it is.
No.
Okay.
Don't distort the conception. And I think fundamentally, let's just understand, yes, there are different narratives of it, but it's largely people who have advocated for equality, women to be equally in spaces
That's
where
feminism.
largely-
That's what I
Yeah,
understand.
I'm saying that's it. But
Yes.
now when you... No.
No,
But now let's go back to what your issue is. This
Okay.
is what your issue is, to say that at some point, it felt as if women were asserting themselves in different spaces. Some even saying, "Look, we're independent." Da 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 da. And unfortunately, in assertion, some people believe that they were bitter or they were angry and so forth. And and I always say, Black women cannot apologize, right, for rethinking or reshaping who they were always thought or perceived to be. And I think that's where the anger or the narrative of bitterness comes from, where I believe as a Black woman, I cannot be subjected to this anymore. Even the whole concept of imbogod, to say a lot of women would have to stomach a lot of injustices. And that presupposes her to be a good woman, to be a strong woman, to be the ideal Black woman. But narratives have changed. I'll give an example. You spoke about slay queens. There are women who really enjoy the comforts of luxury. There are women who, whatever your views of it, but there are women who've said, I enjoy the comforts of luxury. And suddenly there is a distorted narrative that most women who enjoy this are slay queens, or there's a bad perception around that. Purely because for the longest of time, we've not had Black women enjoy luxury. We've not had Black women who've actually said, I would like to live a different life from what is considered to be this way of life, right? Also, some women have, Black women in particular, had never been in echelons of power. And you find when a woman is assertive, or she's a CEO, or she becomes something powerful in politics, that woman seems arrogant, that woman seems aggressive. A perception you never get on men who are in the same positions. You don't get narratives, for example, about Trump, how he behaves and so forth. But the moment Kamala Harris comes up, it's, God, what is this woman doing? And it happens all the time. And sadly, the backlash is largely for Black women. So whether a Black woman chooses to live soft, or whether a Black woman chooses to be assertive, there's always this narrative to say, no. A black woman,
But
or what is perceived to be a Black woman, is not that.
Okay, and I agree with you. I understand what feminism is. Equality, fighting for women. I get feminism. But there are those who have misconceptions about what it really is.
Yes.
And those are the ones who then tend to believe that feminist is being anti-man or anti-whatever, right? But then I think on the issue of luxury, or what you call slave queens, we don't mind women having luxury lives, but as long as you work for it and you make a living for it, and you don't just date for luxury. You don't
Can I
date
ask you
for
this
it.
question?
Yes.
When these very powerful men enable this, when rich, old, powerful men enable it, who calls them out? When they go to these January 8 parties and take these young girls and decide to buy them Gucci bags, who calls those men out? When these old, rich, powerful men in politics and government and in business decide to exploit those girls, who calls them out?
True, there are the victims,
Right.
basically, yeah, because
But I'm saying that you have a society that depicts this girl as whatever it is that they want to depict.
but doesn't she have the responsibility to say no? I'm just saying.
In a capitalist-
Doesn't she have to say no? I'm not gonna date
Can I
you
ask
for
you
your
a question?
money.
In a capitalist society with all the class inequalities, and a lot of these young black women who find themselves in the environments that I'm not justifying anything at this point, but my question becomes, why is it consistently this supposed perception or backlash goes to these girls and not the men who say, I use my power? Because this power is not just with these slay queens. There are women who've gotten into positions, unfortunately, because they get exploited by men. There are women probably who's working or wants to get into a retail store, but there's a powerful man who's a supervisor and says, listen, you first need to go through this. So there's no exception to it. I'm simply saying systemically, you still have patriarchy that enables all these things, that creates this. But unfortunately, the people that get the backlash is the black woman. So
certainly.
we cannot say the exception is the norm. Largely, and if you look at even some of the backgrounds where these black girls come from, you would be surprised. Who enabled the slave queen environment? At some point, it was the African National Congress going to these January 8 statements, right? It's these parties, the lavishness. Who do you see? Young black girls that go to these parties. Let's not be afraid to talk about that, right? Who created this opulence and said, look, a weave and an iPhone will get you way better life than a degree or a master's degree. How many of these kids see their counterparts who have PhDs, who have masters, and are not getting anywhere? And this is not a justification, but I'm saying we're in a system, a perverse system, where this is enabled by the rich. This is enabled by people who are in power and who've got resources.
You know, I agree with you clearly. I was in Cape Town on Monday, walking around the CBD on Long Street, and I saw young girls who was like, Bafana, like, hi, 100 rand for a night. I was like, you know, it pains my heart where we see women, you know, when it pains my heart to see a girl thinking that her value can only be her body and her beauty. That's not what I'm saying. And I think we owe it to ourselves as men, to call out those comrades and say what you are doing is stupid and it's wrong. And also for women to say, girls, stop saying yes to these things, even though you might have trouble in terms of financial and whatever. It's just a painful factor to think that we are not necessarily prioritizing the quality of character and the quality of an individual, but that now we are making our black women look like they're just they are for sale, and I hate that. And as a black man who loves black women, I just hate to think of my sisters being seen as some people that can be bought with lavish lifestyle. It's just sad. I want our sisters to be married, to be respected, to be honored based on the quality of their character. That was my view.
The irony, so everyone who's okay will just get married. Da, da, da. But anyway, this is my question. Okay, in fact, it's an opinion.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for us to have a moral debate in the current capitalist system we live in.
Sadly.
Because, you know, you can speak about this whole idea of morality for black women, and yet we can speak about the morality of banks. We can speak about the morality of white-collar crimes and so many other things. But my question becomes, who then predetermines morality in a society where you've got 40% of the nation unemployed, when you've got people who are not raised entirely by the parents? There are people who are in streets right now who are vagrants, abadonsa matroli, you know, to go recycle. Unfortunately, you use whatever it is. People now have been able to use whatever it is that they've got in order to survive. Whether we like it, whether we want to argue what
It's
the
wrong or
morality,
right.
It unfortunately it isn't. But capitalism fundamentally is a perverse and disgusting system that creates these realities.
Gugu,
You know.
I just have to, sorry for time. I'm enjoying this conversation. This exchange is very healthy. Just two questions. What we have seen as of recent, the drug abuse, you spoke about it earlier, the mental health issues. You are a writer. I think you are writing a book concerning this in the near future. I hope you do.
is,
But then, how do we, where we are as young people, specifically on women? We have seen a lot of women now drinking, smoking, things that were not necessarily like we were not popular by the time when we were growing up to see a girl with weed rolling a joint or drunk and whatever, but slowly but surely it kind of shows that both our people, young people in general, not just women, young people in general, but you have a lot of mental health issues. But for women specifically, what would be your opinion on how do we deal with this scourge of drugs and mental health?
People who are in a better position, like you, me, those in government, those in the private sector, are the biggest hypocrites and are the biggest culprits, in my view, in helping the society and trying to change things. And I sincerely believe that a lot of things are systemic, because even the scourge of drugs, someone benefits immensely. Someone is a multimillionaire sitting very comfortably. Look at the drug busts that are currently happening, and it shows that there are those that are doing well through the pain of others. You know what? As a woman, or any black woman for that matter out there, I say go after what you believe in, whether it's your dreams, it is possible. But I also want to hold government accountable to say those dreams that have been shattered and destroyed is a result of people being despondent from the false hopes, the false dreams, people who've constantly wanted to believe that there's a better life, And I don't think we're doing enough. I don't think we're doing justice. And also to corporate South Africa. Some of these white-collar criminals that are sitting with corporate social investments somewhere, which could be money that is directed elsewhere in the economy. I really believe in young people. Look at them on YouTube. Look at them on TikTok. Look at the things that they do.
Things, yes.
They print. They try. They really try. Look at the Olympics, the results of what happened. We've got so much immense talent in South Africa. But the wealthy are not coming to the party.
Yes.
And I think they should, and government should too.
I agree with you there. Last question, then I will give you your 2 minutes of fame. But I will give you this last question. Are we ready as a nation, as a country, after all we have spoken, are we ready in the next election to have a woman president? Shoot.
We're always ready. Do we want to? That's the question. I don't know. We're always ready.
You're always ready.
We were always. Black women have been there at the forefront. It's this month is quite significant in history. We've always had black women who've been fighting for it. But the question becomes, as South Africans, are we willing to support that black woman?
We have women like your Helen Suzman, Winnie Mandela, Ruth First, you name them, who fought at the forefront of the struggle. And throughout history and throughout the years, in the past 30 years, do you feel that we honor those women, or even any other, will you honor women who have done a lot for our country the same way we honor men?
No. And I'll give you a very simplistic example. There was a project I was doing. I was looking for an archive of Winnie Mandela's speeches. I couldn't find it, not even in ANC archives. And it shows that we elevated males, historical male figures than women. It was quite unfortunate.
Gugu Ndima, spokesperson of RISE Mzansi. The camera is behind me right here. It's Women's Month. We are ripping it up. And what's your message to the ladies out there, wherever they are, in business, in politics? What is your message? How do we inspire these young girls? And there's right there.
You're doing great. You're doing so well despite the challenges and everyone thinking that you're not. Keep your head up. It's very difficult. Take care of yourself, your mental health. And if you feel that you're not where you wanted to be, don't be afraid to start over. Take a break and pat yourself on the back. And more importantly, say to the young lady, that you miss, the youngest version of yourself, you're sorry for whatever you put them through, but you definitely will not disappoint them.
That's Gugu Ndima, the national spokesperson of RISE Mzansi. This was Beyond the Ballot, proudly brought to you by a podcast party where great minds don't think alike. I am Bafana Modise. This month we are celebrating women of influence, women in leadership, just like herself. You heard her thoughts. Do you agree with her? Share your comments on the comment section and remember to share, like, and subscribe. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.